Welcome to Holy Trinity this morning. My name's Rebecca. I'm part of the team here. And you are so welcome, particularly if this is your first time or if you're visiting and you're looking for a place. Maybe could this be a place that you might want to call home? Maybe you're new to Dublin, or you haven't been to church for a while, or you've never been to church before. There are a couple of things that you can do just to find out more about us, find out if this is a place that you might want to plug in and join the family. So the first thing you can do is chat to any of us. So we'll have a picnic after the service, and Gordon and Sandra, do you just want to give us a wave so anyone knew? These guys are going to be hosting that picnic. So we'll just meet at the back and then we head basically down this road. There's a green space over there and we'll all be having a picnic. It's a lovely day for a picnic today. It hasn't been every Sunday that we've done this, but we've been committed most Sundays. But this week, the sun is out. So yeah, if you are new, we'd love to meet you at the picnic. You can go and grab some food if you don't have any and then come and join us. Another thing to do is to sign up. Oh yeah, sorry. Very good. Yeah. I said it too early. I'm sorry. You can sign up to our newsletter. So go to our website, htrinity.ie, and you'll be able to sign up for the newsletter on there, or you can fill in, there's a little I'm new section on there, and someone from our team will be in touch with you during the week. There are also little welcome cards around, and at the back, if you find someone from the welcome team, they'll be able to let you know more. And that's just where we kind of send out every Monday all the info of everything that's going on in the church, in the life of the church in that week or coming up. So do sign up for that if you want to find out what's happening. So as I said, the picnic's happening today straight after this service. So Gordon and Sandra will be leading that. So head out into the sunshine and stay for as long as you want. We'll have games and stuff going on as well. So that will be great. The next thing to say is Jonathan is leading, it is you, I'm assuming, good. Jonathan is leading our next walk and talk. You weren't sure where I was going to go with that. Jonathan, which will be this Friday. It's just an opportunity for us to hang out as a church family, to get a bit of exercise, go for a walk. So we'll be meeting this Friday at Poolbeg Lighthouse. No, we'll be walking to Poolbeg Lighthouse, is that right? And we'll be meeting at the Shelley Banks car park from 6:30 p.m. So bring your dogs, bring your kids, bring yourselves or your friends, whoever you want to bring. If you need a lift to get there, I actually have no idea where that is. Is it easy? Can you get there like on the bus or something? Oh, there you go. Okay. Do you want to say anything, Jonathan? There is a bus. Otherwise, yeah, go on. Well, don't worry. If you go down the road, turn right, then take the next left. No, if you need a lift, I mean, Google Maps is always helpful, isn't it? You can put it in there. That will tell you how to get there. If you do need a lift, get in touch with Zoe at htrinity.ie. His email address is not on there. Or just get in touch with us and we can help arrange some lifts to get there. Otherwise, Jonathan can give you a detailed instruction of how to get there at the end of the service. So that's this Friday at 6 o'clock, Shelley Banks car park. And then the final thing to say is this evening we have Rekindle. It's going to be awesome. Chloe wrote this, I think, at like 12 o'clock last night, having been in worship for 3 hours. So overflowing with passion. But it is going to be awesome. Rekindle, we believe, as a church, we want everything to overflow out of prayer and worship, out of our devotion to God and our love of God. So those nights, we do them every month, are an amazing opportunity just to come together and have more time of worship, more time of prayer. We just see where the Lord wants to take us. And so please do come along for that. If you are hungry, as in spiritually hungry, there won't be any actual food, but if you're spiritually hungry, come. We need your hunger. We want to be pressing into all that God wants to do. If you're not hungry, come along and be drawn up into what God's doing. He wants to release hunger in our community, we believe. And so do come along to that. That's tonight at 7:30 here in the church. Tonight, 7:30 here in the church. All right, that's all of our announcements. So the final thing to do before we have a meet and greet, and Scott is going to come and speak to us, is our giving. So we believe that everything we have comes from God. Money, finances, time, gifts, everything. And so some of our worship and our response to God is to give it back to him as a thank you, as part of our worship. So we're going to say these words together on the screen, just to remind us of why we give, and to give everything back to God. So let's say these words together. Lord, everything we have comes from you, so we respond in worship by giving these gifts and our lives back to you for the glory of your name. Amen. So in a second, some baskets are going to come around. Feel free to give in the baskets. Otherwise, all the information about how you can give online is up here. Follow that QR code. And then after our giving and our little meet and greet, Scott Evans, who is going to be he has kind of joined us already, but will be officially joining us in October as our new curate, which we're super excited about, returning from his training, is going to preach this morning on Joseph as we continue our summer series. So turn to someone next to you, especially if you don't know them, welcome them, see how they're doing this morning, and then we'll be back with Scott in about 2 minutes.
Yeah, check, 1 2 1 2 1 2. I think that sounds good. Yeah, great.
Broken hearts declare his praise. For who can stop the Lord Almighty? And our God is the Lion of Judah. He's roaring with power and fighting our battles. And every knee will bow before him. Our God is the Lamb that was slain for the sins of the world. His blood breaks the chains, and every knee will bow before the Lion and the Lamb. Every knee will bow before him. Yeah! So open up the gates. So open up the gates. Make way before the King of Kings. The God who comes to save is here to set the captives free. For who can stop the Lord Almighty? Our God is the Lion of Judah. He's roaring with power and fighting our battles. And every knee will bow before him. Our God is the Lamb that was slain for the sin of the world.
Thank you. It's always a tough when you don't get to use your Brittany mic, but I'll be all right. It is lovely to be back. Everyone, good morning. That's a good high energy response after that complicated microphone procedure. So it is great to be here. As Rebecca was saying, it's great to be back. I am kind of gradually returning here to our community. I've been here for the last 11 years, but for the last year, I was in Kilternan continuing my training to become a minister, and so I'll be ordained a priest at the end of September and then starting here officially in October. But until then, I'm still a chaplain in UCD, and I will be continuing some of that after the ordination. And I also lead the practice, which is our young adults community here at Holy Trinity, and we have a gathering called Vespers on Thursday nights. So if that interests you, just grab me after the service or drop me an email, and we'll add you to the WhatsApp group, and you can be peppered with ridiculous gifts and links and also information about different things that we have going on. So this morning, we are continuing our Through the Generations series, where we're following the story of God's people, but also the story of God's work in people, revealing himself to the world and drawing the whole world to himself. So after the last few weeks, we've talked about Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and then today we jump into Joseph, a figure that many of us will know from either Sunday school or Broadway musicals or both. Last week, when we were finishing up the story of Jacob, we were in the very competent hands of Dr. Julie McKinley, whose PhD in language knowledge drew out the original Hebrew and the profundity of her expertise with the original texts. And I have expertise also to offer. I have a different expertise, but it is an expertise nonetheless. And my expertise comes from, I played both Jacob and Potiphar in my 5th class production of Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat. Not everyone can play 2 parts. But I'll tell you who can is the guy who auditioned for Joseph and didn't get it. So he could be at the beginning and at the end, but not get the main bit. Anyway, that's where my expertise comes from. Sadly, I don't think it'll give us the kind of wisdom and insight that Julie brought, but hopefully we'll find something akin to that as we read this passage and explore it. So this is from Genesis chapter 37. Jacob settled in the land where his father had lived as an alien, the land of Canaan. This is the story of the family of Jacob. Joseph, being 17 years old, was shepherding the flock with his brothers. He was a helper to the sons of Bilhah and Zilpah, his father's wives, and Joseph brought a bad report of them to their father. Now Jacob loved Joseph more than any of his children because he was the son of his old age, and he had made him a long robe with sleeves. But when his brothers saw that their father loved him more than all his brothers, they hated him, and they could not speak peaceably to him. Now his brothers went to pasture their father's flock near Shechem, and Israel, or Jacob, said to Joseph, "Are not your brothers pasturing the flock at Shechem? Come, I will send you to them." He answered, "Here I am." So he said to him, "Go now, see if it is well with your brothers and with the flock, and bring word back to me." So he sent him from the valley of Hebron. And then skipping down to at the end of verse 17. So Joseph went after his brothers and found them at Dothan. They saw him from a distance, and before he came near to them, they conspired to kill him. They said to one another, "Here comes this dreamer. Come now, let us kill him and throw him into one of the pits. Then we shall say that a wild animal has devoured him, and we shall see what will become of his dreams." But when Reuben heard it, he delivered him out of their hands, saying, "Let us not take his life." Reuben said to them, "Shed no blood. Throw him into this pit here in the wilderness, but lay no hand on him." He said this so that he might rescue him out of their hand and restore him to their father. So when Joseph came to his brothers, they stripped him of his robe, the long robe with sleeves that he wore, and they took him and threw him into a pit. The pit was empty, there was no water in it. They sat down to eat, and looking up, they saw a caravan of Ishmaelites coming from Gilead, with their camels carrying gum, balm, and resin on their way to carry it down to Egypt. Then Judah said to his brothers, "What profit is there if we kill our brother and conceal his blood? Come, let us sell him to the Ishmaelites, and not lay our hands on him, for he is our brother, our own flesh." And his brothers agreed. When some Midianite traders passed by, they drew Joseph up, lifting him out of the pit, and sold him to the Ishmaelites for 20 pieces of silver. And they took Joseph to Egypt. It's a very lovely, uplifting story, isn't it? Begins with a complicated family dynamic, and it ends with human trafficking. It's not exactly particularly contained in this passage, immediately hopeful or exciting, and I think we need to lean into that. Before we get into the meat of it, I think for many people, Joseph's coat is the thing that they remember the most from this story. And that might be from Sunday school or a love of the West End, but it's the thing that we remember most vividly. It's the thing that sticks out. And different translations describe Joseph's coat in different ways. In the NIV, it's described as ornate. In the Message, it's described as elaborately emblazoned. And in the NRSV, it continuously describes it as a long robe with sleeves, as if a robe having sleeves is something of huge significance. It seems that this coat, as we'll come to later, this coat with sleeves, it was not so much about how beautiful it was, but what it signified and what it represented. But the idea of such a coat doesn't really translate as well into Irish society today. The idea of your dad giving you a fancy jacket to show the world how much he loves you is pretty cringe in most modern Western culture, but particularly in Ireland, where the idea of deliberately wearing something that draws attention to you will get you mocked unmercifully. I don't know if you saw this happen on Twitter a couple of years ago, but somebody posted this brilliant tweet, and then loads of people began to share their stories about how wearing things that were just slightly unusual began to get them absolutely mocked in Ireland. First one here. Props to anyone who tries to be fashionable in Ireland. I wore a red beret once in Waterford and someone called me Super Mario. There's a fella in a village in West Limerick whose nickname is Style because he wore a leather jacket in the pub once about 15 years ago. Also the pure classic, the fella whose name was Spider because his buddy saw him buying 4 pairs of jeans. So good. I wore a suit with a matching tie and pocket square to my first day of work at an advertising company. I thought I was going to be in Mad Men, I guess, and the staff sent around and signed a communion card for me with a $5 in it. I once wore a silver jacket to college, turned up late for class and said, sorry, I'm late. Lecturer said, that's okay. Then waited till I was halfway across the front of the class before following up with, trouble with the spaceship again, was it? My sister was in France sporting a new trench coat she thought was so stylish, but then went into an Irish bar and got called Inspector Gadget by the first guy that saw her. Early 90s Oma, a bloke comes into the bar wearing a puffer jacket, 120 notes it cost. Everyone's mocking him. Barman says, not sure why you're mocking him. I have one of those at home. Lad getting mocked says, see? Barman continues, aye, it's round the immersion heater. Next slide there. That's what that looks like. Just if you didn't grow up in Ireland in the 80s and 90s, that's a pretty niche reference. So many of us, we know this story, we know. And the thing that comes to mind is perhaps the coat. But if we were asked really to dig into it and say, what are we supposed to learn from it? Particularly just this element from the origin story of Joseph up until his journey into Egypt, before there's any resolution, before there's any explanation of God's activity in the story. I'm not sure how we would describe it. What are we trying to learn about how God works in this story? Are we trying to learn from the flawed human characters within it? I think it's both. And in the story of Joseph, I find myself struck by 2 F's. It is a story of faithfulness, and number 2 is a story of family trauma. The author, and I kind of love this, doesn't give us a framework for who's right and who's wrong in the story. They just tell us the story and they let it sit there. And we're invited to wrestle with it, like Jacob wrestled with God that we were talking about a couple weeks ago. So it raises this question for us, what is this story about then? Firstly, I think it's about a father who has not done the inner work of reflection on his own story. One of the meanings of the name Jacob is to supplant or to replace, to take the place of someone else. Growing up as a younger son, as we heard last week, Jacob had this this unique combination of inferiority complex and mummy issues. And he spent his whole life, his whole story, masquerading as someone else in order to get a blessing that wasn't his. His whole life was defined by trying to be Esau, to look like Esau, to pass for Esau, to get Esau's blessing. Because at some point, Jacob and Esau had both come to believe that there was 2 sons, but only 1 blessing. And you find that that's what their father believed as well. When after Jacob takes a blessing that isn't his, Esau goes to him and says, do you have a blessing left to give me? And he's like, it's already gone. At some point, this family narrative became, I only have so much love and blessing to give you. And then it became the family story. The family story was a fight for blessing, a fight for something that was scarce instead of something that is infinite. Love, blessing, and the goodness of God. So Jacob dresses up as someone else in order to get a blessing that wasn't his. And this theft ruptures his family. It breaks down his relationship with his father, but also his relationship with his brother. And it sends him running to build a life of his own while they're left to pick up the pieces. Jacob knows this. He knows the trauma and the destruction that dysfunctional parental love can cause. And then he meets God. And he begins to put his life back together and to make amends and to bring about reparation in his family. And then what does he do? He has a whole rake of kids and picks a favorite. Not the eldest, but a younger son, like he was. The eldest son of his favorite wife. I too have a favorite wife. My story is less complex than this family one. Despite all the drama and the trauma of his upbringing, his inferiority complex about being the younger son and his struggle to be himself, Jacob still cannot resist the temptation and the tendency to pass on his trauma to those who come after him. It's brutal, but it makes complete sense. We all know this story, not from scripture, but from our own family stories, and the way in which we all pass on the things we inherit to each other, and the way in which we're trying to break that cycle. Richard Rohr says, we transmit that which we do not transform. Or as we might say for ourselves, that which we do not heal has permission to continue to hurt and to harm. So this is a story. So what's the story about? It's about a father who hasn't worked through his issues. But it's about more than that. It's also about a son who doesn't know what to do with his belovedness. Joseph is born into the family as the firstborn of his father's favorite wife. And his narrative from the beginning is that he's beloved, favorite, and special. But he has no idea what to do with it. He starts to have dreams where his brothers and family will gather around and bow to him, that they will serve him. These dreams, they predict the future and are fascinatingly woven into the story. But we also don't get any mention in the story that these dreams are from God. We just get that these dreams happen. And what he does with them is so interesting. He starts to have these dreams, and they inform the way in which he is loved, causes him to see himself as above the world, rather than being empowered to love it, serve it, and be part of making it better. His belovedness ends up being symbolized by this beautiful coat. A coat which is both a blessing and a curse. We don't know exactly what made it special, colors or fabrics or sleeves. But we know that it projected significance and superiority. And we know that it's not the kind of coat you wear to work in the fields. And that's why while his brothers are herding sheep, he's at home with nothing to do of meaning or significance except to wear his fancy coat. He's not working. He's the special one, the dressed up fancy one, the one the family kept clean. And the garment that shows the closeness that he has with his father is also the garment that brings the distance between him and his brothers, that disconnects him from his family. I think Joseph's tragedy is that the way in which he learned to be loved didn't teach him how to learn to love others. It taught him how to expect and demand love, not give it. So it's a story about a son who didn't know what to do with his belovedness, which is also a story that we face. If we know the story of the goodness of God and the love that he pours out on us, but not the way in which we're invited to pour out love on others in the story that God is telling about the redemption and the restoration of all things. And then it's also a story about brothers who feel unloved, hurt, and exploited. It's a story about envy. It's a story about anger. In verse 4 we read, "But when his brothers saw that their father loved him more than all his brothers, they hated him, and they could not speak peaceably to him." It's about the way in which these feelings come up and the way in which these feelings come out in violence, toxicity, and brutality. We transmit what we will not transform. This whole story, this whole heartbreaking story, is shaped by brokenness. It's shaped by a father who hasn't resolved his story. And as somebody who's a father of a 2-and-a-bit-year-old and who's soon to be, within like the next 2 weeks, going to be the father of a second, like this jars me. I've got to ask this question. What have I consciously and unconsciously inherited? And what will I give to those that I raise, those who God has charged me with to love and raise up in this world? And will the inheritance that I give them be a blessing or a curse? It's a story about a son who doesn't know how to treat his belovedness. And that's one of those things that I wrestle with for myself. I'm going to tell one of my most embarrassing stories. And even though the more I tell it, the easier it gets, I still want to die every time I tell it. I remember one of the first times that I got invited to speak outside of Ireland. I thought it was a pretty big deal. And I didn't just think it was a pretty big deal. I thought I was a pretty big deal. And so I got this invitation to go and speak in the Netherlands and at this youth camp. And I was like, yes, someone else. For the first time in my life, someone other than my parents is paying for my flights. This is pretty exciting, guys. Someone is flying me across Europe to hear what I have to say about God. Pretty hot stuff. So I ended up the night before I was going, I was helping my dad sort an IT problem, because that's what children do in 2020, whatever. I ended up being up all night, and this is all just an excuse, but like I was up all night, so I didn't get a lot of sleep, and then it was a Ryanair flight, so obviously not great. And I fly in, I'm picked up, and I'm driven from the airport over to this youth camp, and I'm brought in, and we go into the kitchen, and they're like, "Oh, can we get you anything?" And I was like, "Yeah, I'd love some coffee. I'm really tired." And she goes, "Oh, the coffee machine's in the corner." No, this didn't happen on the outside. It happened inside me. But I just went, "My own coffee? Do you know who I am?" That's what I heard myself say. And I wanted to die. I wanted to turn around and get back in that car and get back to the airport and fly home. Now, I don't hear God speak audibly, I don't think ever, but I often get a really strong sense of hearing something on my heart that I think is from him. And I heard this response from God that says, "She knows exactly who you are. It's you who has forgotten." Because I didn't know what to do with my belovedness. That I was there to bless, not to receive. That I was there to serve, not to be served. And it's a story about brothers who don't know how to deal with their anger, about what we do with our anger, our resentment and envy, which are all energies that our world requires to continue moving. So much of our economy and our society life is based on the idea that you have to have more than someone else. And so it thrives on discontent and on rivalry rather than on peace and sharing and belovedness and love. I know the story of my first lie in my family. My mum remembers it very clearly because it was very obvious. She came into my brother's bedroom, who's a year and a half younger than me, while he was still in a cot and not able to walk, and found his favorite book cut up on the floor with a pair of scissors. And she asked me, "How did this happen?" And I said, "He did it. Because he's a bad kid." I don't know if I said he was a bad kid, but I know that's what was going on in my mind. I was already like sowing the seeds right then. I was probably like 3 years old. I was like, this kid's a threat. He needs to be taken out ASAP. Because we all have it. It's this broken instinct that we have. The hardest thing is to overcome it, to move past it, to heal it. Joseph's story ends way later by telling us all the ways in which God had been active, in spite of human choices throughout this story, to bring about redemption and to make himself known to the world. And we are God's people today who are called to make him known. We have learned what it means to be human from Jesus, the perfect example of humanity in all its fullness. And while God can bring good from evil in order to reveal himself in the world, we really don't need to make him work so hard. He's looking for people he doesn't have to work in spite of, but for a people he can partner with to bring his goodness into the world. And so as we come to the table together, it's an opportunity to explore our own stories, to ask ourselves the question, am I Jacob? Am I thoughtlessly passing on my own trauma, my own wounds and scars to those around me? In what ways do I need to be healed? In what ways do my cycles need to be broken? In what way do I need God to change or to redeem my story? Or am I Joseph? Have I learned to be loved in a way that makes me expect love or demand love, instead of in a way that teaches me to love others deeply, intimately, and sacrificially? Are my dreams about my glory or about God's goodness bursting into the world? Or am I one of Joseph's brothers? Am I holding it together on the outside, which we do a great job of in church, but inside I'm simmering with anger and envy at those around me? Why do they have what they have? Why do they get everything I want? What makes them so lovely? What makes them so worthy? What makes them whatever? Why does that person get what they want while I have this? Am I Jacob's brothers or Joseph's brothers, whose stories and lives are ruled by anger and envy? Let us come to the table, to the place of healing, to the place of love poured out in the midst of the brokenness and the messiness of our stories, that we might be his people who tell and who live his story. Let us pray.